Right, so we're going to do an essay now on just summarising Foote's virtue ethics. And if you got this question in the exam, then I expect you all to jump up and down cheering, because this is a great question to get. So remember our introduction, just 4 lines, nice and quick. What virtue ethics is, define the fact that it's an agent-centred ethical theory, meaning that you become a good person and then you will automatically do good things. So it's about developing your character rather than judging you on specific actions that you do, which is what act-centred ethics is all about. That it's your actions which determine whether you are good or bad. So it's the other way around. But remember, you must define those terms. And then talking about the modern revival of virtue ethics, which started with Anscombe, and Foote is one of the modern virtue ethicists, and they all developed the work of Aristotle. So that's really your introduction there. So your first paragraph then on Foote is to discuss her virtues, and you would start off by saying that the purpose of becoming virtuous for her is to reach eudaimonia. So again, like Aristotle, it's to reach eudaimonia, flourishing, both for the self and for the community as well. And again, like Aristotle, for Foote, the virtues lie in between two vices, the vice of deficiency and the vice of excess. And so she mentions justice, honesty and courage as examples of her virtues that she thinks it's important to develop. And then remember, for each and every paragraph should have an example. And so here you would give an example of how we find the midpoint between the vices to develop the virtues. So if you were acting honestly, you would need to think, well, I don't want to act according to the vice of deficiency, so I don't want to lie. I don't want to act according to the vice of excess, so being too honest. I want to head down the middle way and just be honest enough. And that's the virtuous thing to do. That's where the virtue is. So moving on from that, we need to talk about intentions and desires. And so what she says is you need to both intend to and want to act virtuously. And only actions carried out for a good end and with the intention and desire to act virtuously can be classed as a virtue. So you can't say something like using courage to rob a bank is you couldn't say there that courage, that characteristic, that courage is a virtue, because it's being used for a bad end. And so it's only when you want to and intend to use a characteristic, a quality of your character for a good end that it can be classed as a virtue. So, for example, you could talk about adultery, and here we're talking about adulterer B, if you remember from our applying virtue ethics essays. And so if you're talking about adulterer B, who discusses with his wife that he wants to commit adultery because he loves his wife, but she can't fulfill his sexual needs because of medical issues, but he feels that he needs those needs met in order for his marriage to continue and so on, so to keep his marriage together. So there, he is intending and wanting to act virtuously. And so for him there, using honesty and courage to discuss it with his wife, etc., these characteristics can be classed as virtues because he is intending and wanting to act virtuously by doing those things. So moving on from that, Foote discusses how virtues are correctives. She calls them correctives. And if you think about it, virtues are valued and seen as special because they act against our natural tendencies to act unvirtuously. If everyone, for example, was naturally honest, then we wouldn't see honesty as a special characteristic to have. However, we do think it's special. So if somebody is an honest person, we look up to them, we think that they're a good person, a special type of person. So that indicates that it must be natural for us to act dishonestly, because if everyone was honest, then we wouldn't respect people who are honest, because it's just normal. Everyone would be honest. But the fact that we do respect people who are honest indicates that it's not natural for us to be honest. And so that's what she's saying, that all virtues are correctives against our natural tendencies to act unvirtuously. So, for example, justice is a corrective of our natural tendency to be selfish. And, you could make reference here to McIntyre and say how he would agree with that and use his moral vacuum and the idea that we're all very selfish and individualistic as evidence that he would agree with her. And you could also include here the analogy of the planks of wood, whereby she says that virtues act like weights on the end of planks of wood. Because when planks of wood are kept outside, unless they're weighed down on both ends, it will kind of curl up. The plank of wood will curl up, it will bow, it will curl up. And so they put weights on either end to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's what she says virtues are for us. They kind of stop us from bending towards our natural tendency. It's the natural tendency of wood to bend. It's our natural tendency to do things like act selfishly. And the virtues act as correctives to prevent us from bending towards that natural tendency, just like the weights act as a corrective for the plank of wood to stop it from acting according to its natural tendency to curl up. And finally then, you would talk about degrees of virtues, and she discusses how different people develop virtues to different degrees. And this is all to do with the difficulty you face in acting virtuously. So if it is very difficult for you to act in a virtuous way, but yet you still do, then what she would say is you have developed, or you've used or shown that you have virtue to a higher degree than somebody who uses the same virtue, but it was very easy for them to do so. So, for example, if a poor man gives to charity, that shows that they have a higher degree of justice than a rich man who gave to charity. They've both developed and used the virtue of justice. It's just that it was much harder for the poor man to give to charity, so it was much harder for him to act justly, but he still did. And so it shows that he has used and has a higher degree of the virtue of justice.